Hello, everyone. Thank you for, now I'm not. Good afternoon and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Santa Barbara's November Community Forum, Confronting Racism in Santa Barbara. Promises to be really exciting. I am Vijaya Jamalamadaka, president of our Santa Barbara League. This meeting is being recorded, as you heard, and will be uploaded to our YouTube site along with links to follow up with resources. We are sold out, so to speak, so we apologize if you couldn't get in. This is for the recording. The forum is also being live streamed to Facebook. So if you have Facebook, you can view the forum there by searching at LWVSB. We apologize, we don't have simultaneous Spanish translation like we usually do for our live forums, but Zoom limitations don't let us record our events in other languages, so we decided not to do that. November is Native American Heritage Month. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Chumash people who are the traditional custodians of this land. Doing so is important for a few reasons. We do it to offer recognition and respect, to counter the doctrine of discovery with the true story of the people who were already here, and to support larger truth-telling and reconciliation efforts, to remind ourselves that colonization is an ongoing process, and to take a cue from our indigenous brethren about the protocols that call for opening spaces with reverence and respect. I'll tell you a little bit about the Chumash people. Maybe you already know this, but the Chumash people once numbered in tens of thousands and lived along the coasts of California. The modern day communities of Santa Barbara, Montecito, Summerlin, and Carpinteria were carved out of old Chumash territory, unceded. Through centuries of hardships and abuse, the Chumash people have overcome all odds in order to thrive on the land of their ancestors. We pay our respects to Chumash elders, past, present, and future, who call this place their home, and we thank the Chumash community for their stewardship and support. Look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Let's pause for a few seconds to honor the Chumash people who continue to contribute so much richness and wisdom to the environment, culture, and community of Santa Barbara. Thank you. Now I have some announcements for the League. This Saturday, we have a special meeting for all our members only. Please email me if you don't have the registration link yet. It was sent out October 26th. You can also join us as a member by going to our website. As a follow-up to this forum, we have planned not one, but two follow-up virtual discussion groups for our members. The first Zoom meeting will be on Saturday, December 5th at 1 p.m. and it will focus on racism from the Chumash perspective. Our discussion leader will be Mia Lopez of the Wish-Toyo Foundation. She is also our panelist today, so you'll hear more from her. The second follow-up discussion group will be on Tuesday, December 8th at 5:30 p.m. and it'll be led by Linda Honigman, who is our moderator today. Both require pre-registration, so you will find the registration links on our website calendar on our homepage. And lastly, our next community forum will be after the holidays in January. The topic will be our local economy. Please check our website calendar for the details of all our events. Now, let's start this forum on confronting racism in Santa Barbara. I think you will agree that today's topic is very timely, and we give a big thanks to the organizers of this forum. They are League members Linda Honigman, Mary Jacob, and Reve Moran. And Erica Schweitzer is helping us with the Facebook live streaming, and she will be uploading it to the recording to our YouTube. We will be monitoring your questions and comments posted in the Q&A box only and answering them live or typing it in. So please don't raise your hand or use the chat function. We are pleased to welcome our distinguished panelists who will be introduced by our moderator, Linda Honigman. A little about Linda. Linda is a strong advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion and housing justice. She is a co-founder of a new nonprofit, Future Housing Communities and neighbormatch.org, and is a very active member of our housing and social policy committees. Please welcome our moderator for this forum, Linda Honigman.
Thank you. It's very appropriate for us to be focusing on racism at the end of such an eventful year. A year that began with a widening equity gap and overlays of climate change, a housing crisis, employment and income disparities, and a lack of health care for all. The additional racial and ethnic vulnerabilities exposed by the pandemic and unimaginable police brutality for high-profile examples like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd have been a wake-up call for white people who have been allowed to ignore signs that were always there. It has also been a year when people of color came together for mutual aid, a celebration of Black community, and were able to focus energy on demanding change. On May 31st, the founders of Healing Justice Santa Barbara, Simone Aquila Ruskamp and Crystal Farmer Seagart, organized a well-attended rally to bring attention to the unnecessary deaths of African Americans nationwide. Speakers shared stories of the effects of racism locally, such as the loss of the Second Baptist Church that could have been avoided by support from the white community. A week later, another well-attended rally was organized by local African American high school students, Shakir Ahmad and Talia Hamilton. They spoke about inequities that still negatively impact people of color in our institutions and presented a list of demands to the school board of the Santa Barbara district. White people listened, but as wise people have advised, we need to do more than just listen and attend a rally. Today's forum will be moderated by myself, Linda Honigman, Reve Moran, and Mary Jacob. Our purpose as a white organizing committee, guided by the policies and goals of the League of Women Voters, is to educate by amplifying voices from people of color and to focus on ourselves and our institutions as a source of systemic racism. A number of positive actions have begun from the hard work and strong leadership of our Black and Brown neighbors. We hope this forum will contribute to the next phase of healing, which will require a lot of us, especially white people, to do some work. Today's forum will cover evolving views of racism and becoming anti-racist, recognizing white privilege, costs of segregation, and importance of diversity, a glimpse of Santa Barbara's past from a person of color perspective, systemic racism as seen in healthcare disparities, systemic racism and K-12 schools, and systemic racism in public safety departments. Towards the end, we'll review action items we can take to help reverse systemic racism. As appropriate, we will be sharing the results of our Santa Barbara Racism Survey. We had over 100 respondents. We had a good spread of ages, and there was also a good spread across the South County. And here's the racial ethnic breakdown. And speaking of racial ethnic labels, We have been trained to start using the label Latinx by academics, but only 3% of the Latino population in the US actually use the term. The Pew Research Center found that instead, they prefer to self-identify as Hispanic, 61%, followed by Latino, 29%, or their country of origin. Evolving views of racism. At the beginning of our forum planning, we spoke to several Latinas and African Americans about what our approach should be. One advised you should focus on systemic racism, also known as institutional racism. Another recommended the anti-racist approach championed by Ibram X. Kendi, which we will explore in a minute. A third said he doesn't like to use the words racist or racism anymore. Instead, he prefers to focus on white supremacy. As a country, we are rethinking how to define racism and what to do about it. Last May, a college student, Kennedy Mitchum, wrote to the editors at Merriam-Webster to make her case that their definition was too limited and should be revised to better reflect how systemic racism was in society. The editors agreed, and the second part of the definition was changed to the systemic oppression of a racial group to the social, economic, and political advantage of another, specifically white supremacy. The concept popularized by Ibram Kendi to replace not a racist with becoming an anti-racist allows all of us to have more constructive thoughts and dialogue. Here's a quick summary of that concept.
My name is Ibram X. Kendi, and I'm the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. And this book really seeks to show that the contrast is actually not between racist and not racist, but the contrast is between racist and anti-racist. What I think many people who self-identify as not racist don't realize is that really over the course of history, nearly every group of people that we actually consider to be racist have also identified as not racist, whether that's white supremacists today or segregationists of yesterday. And so really, each of us should be striving to be anti-racist, not necessarily striving to be not racist, because really that's a term primarily of denial, and it's a term really that doesn't have much meaning. But it does mean something to be racist. When someone says that there's something wrong with a racial group, they're being racist. When someone says there's nothing wrong with any of the racial groups, they're being anti-racist. When someone supports policies that create and reproduce racial inequity, they're being racist. When someone supports policies that yield and create racial equity, they're being an anti-racist. And these aren't necessarily identities or fixed categories or tattoos. Literally, what we're doing in each moment determines who and what we are in each moment. And people change from moment to moment and from year to year. And I think we should identify people based on what they're saying and doing, because no one ever becomes racist or even anti-racist.
Toya Chumash Foundation to give us a more informed. We are taking our first look into Santa Barbara's past now, and we'll cover the second part where we look at the Black churches and other landmark issues after one today. In 2017, a local attorney, Jeff Newland, came across a plaque at our courthouse that had the following words: "In honor of the first white women and children of the 30 families who marched through California with the colonization expedition of Juan Bautista de Anza, encamped near here, May 1776. Santa Barbara chapter, Daughters of American Revolution, 1930. We will view the video he made at the time, and then we are delighted to have Mia Lopez join us from the Wishtoya Chumash Foundation to give us a more informed perspective.
I moved to Santa Barbara in my 20s. I started my law office across the street from the courthouse, so I passed by this huge rock guarding it, like once a week. One time I stopped to look more closely at it. The plaque, placed by the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1938, a time of our country of intense racial tensions, read, "In honor of the first white women and children of the 30 families who marched through California with the colonization expedition of Juan Bautista de Anza, and camped here May 1776. Wait, what? Measuring history from when the white women arrived? That's weird. What about the non-white women and children? The people colonized? I was busy, so I went on my way, but it bugged me. A few years later, I asked the person in charge of the courthouse grounds about the rock. I learned that whatever it said, he couldn't touch it. The courthouse has been designated a historical landmark. It cannot be changed. Flash forward. November 8, 2016. The 45th president promised to make America great again by taking us back to how things used to be. I am married to a Santa Barbara native who is an African American woman, and my children, in another place in time, would be called Black. When America was great the first time, my wife and I could not legally marry. Not so great. During the primary full of 45's rhetoric and ugly attacks, in front of me, the wife of a white Santa Barbara lawyer cried for the safety of our soon-to-be teenage son. I finally wept for Sabrina Fulton. This brings me back to the rock. I wrote the Dar. The rock represents a history that erases many members of our community. Dar wrote back. The statement of the rock is false, not even historically accurate. The group mentioned was of many cultures and races, including many children like mine. So whose interest does the rock serve now? America's greatness is its ability to move forward, to include more of us. Going back validates the false histories of the powerful. The rock needs to be fixed, not swept under the rug. Whatever we do, we must remember that love trumps hate.
Now I am very pleased to introduce Mia Lopez. She's from the Wishtoya Chumash Foundation as their administrative assistant and a member and tribal representative of the Coastal Band of the Chumash Nation and former tribal chair. She has served her community with environmental issues that affected our lands and coast, has acted as liaison for the tribe and the city of Santa Barbara, UCSB, SBCC, county parks, and many local schools, lecturing on contemporary and historical Chumash culture and bringing people together to acknowledge the land and people throughout Chumash territory. Her work with the Chumash Maritime Association and American Indian Health and Services reflects a connection of health through culture and community. Welcome, Mia.
Thank you so much, Linda, for that introduction. Haku akulia, mia kapti, kapane shumalo kichumash sihisiokstan. Hello, everyone. My name is Mia, and my ancestral Chumash village is Siokstan. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that short video that Jeff created. The rock and the plaques on the rock have been something that have impacted our community for a long time. And this year, in August, one of the county board supervisors saw it. And we have been actually actively trying to get the plaque removed. But when you talk to the courthouse, it's a historical landmark. They can't do it. You talk to the city and it belongs to the county. You talk to the county and there's a lot of runaround. And so it's been something that we have not been able to get changed. But suddenly, a white male sees the plaque and who's in a position of power, and all of a sudden he wants it removed immediately, overnight, doesn't want anything said about it, and happened right away. This was something that when we heard through some weird channels, immediately we heard about that. We said, no, that you can't do that, because we have been asking for a long time. We need to be part of this. It's part of our healing as well. And so we did, through working with Das Williams' office, we were able to convince them to allow us to have that opportunity to remove the plaque, both plaques. And so I'd like to share that, a little bit of that with you. This is Patrick from the county. He was there to loosen up the plaques for us. Kelly Lopez is one of our youth, and had never really looked at them before, but she had heard about them. And Annette Cordero has been a long time servant in Santa Barbara through the city council, the school district, a teacher at Santa Barbara City College. And so she is telling Kelly about that. This is Alicia Cordero, who's the First Nations officer here at Wishtoya Chumash Foundation, as well as a member of the coastal band of the Chumash Nation here in Santa Barbara. And we were allowed to start a ceremony to pray and sing and do this in a good way. This is her daughter, Isa Saldivar, and another representative of our community youth. We came together at 7 a.m. because they wanted to do it at 6 a.m. and we told them that was a little bit early, but we want to be there. So they changed it to 7 a.m. so that it wouldn't be so early for us. But we came together at 7 a.m. to remove these plaques because it meant that much to us. And Annette and Alicia removed this plaque, which was the first white women and children. And Isa and Kelly removed the second plaque in honor of the first white men. And as we stood there, it was really powerful, because these plaques that have been there since the 30s have impacted generations of us. And in this picture, there are generations. There are 3 generations of Chumash women in this picture. And we have created something that will make change for our future and for our youth's future. And we are in the process of working with the county to create new plaques that will honor our Chumash people, our first people of this area. And we would like it to be an inclusionary history marker, as opposed to these that were there, which were erasing everyone else. And contributes to the false narrative that Santa Barbara is and has been a white city. Santa Barbara has never been a predominantly, nor is it now a predominantly white city, and has always been a city with that is multicultural, multiracial, and our populations have always been dominant here. We took our masks off because we wanted to show our smiles, and as we stood and prayed, we cried for the women and children of the De Anza expedition who were not white. We cried for the men on these expeditions who were also indigenous and traveled with these also non-white men. And you can look up the manifesto for the De Anza, and there are no white people. And if these two ships, these two expeditions came into town today, people would be telling them that they are immigrants, when in reality, we are the First Nations people. We are here, and we've been trading with our people to the south before there were borders put upon us. And so thank you for allowing me to come here today and to share with you. And I look forward to having a conversation and delving into a little bit more of our history on December 5th. And I am available. You can reach out to Linda Honigman and Vijaya if you would like to get in touch with me, and before December 5th. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mia. And now we're going to hand it off to Reve Moran, who will introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Linda. We're going to now talk about the healthcare industry in our area. Our speaker, Namina Glantz, is Associate Director of the Samsung Diabetes Research Institute Me4Mia's program, 1,000 Families. These programs are designed to understand and reduce the burden of diabetes locally, nationally, and globally. She grew up in New England, attended high school on the Navajo Reservation, and studied social science and education at Stanford. After spending a decade in Chiapas, Mexico, she earned her PhD at the University of Arizona. Namina managed public health planning and evaluation in Boulder, Colorado, prior to moving to Santa Barbara and joining Samsung's Diabetes Research Institute. After her presentation, we're going to have time for a couple of questions, so please enter them in the Q&A box as you listen to her. Welcome, Namina.
Thank you, Reve. Appreciate that. We'll share my screen. Okay. In 1966, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhuman because it often results in physical death. Today, racism is still pervasive in health and care, and few engaged in healthcare directly address systemic racism and oppressive social relations as a way to improve health. Presentations like this are a way to raise conscience." King referred to inequalities. Health inequalities, also called disparities, are differences between population groups in the presence of disease, health outcomes, or access to care. Health inequities are differences that are unnecessary, avoidable, unfair, and unjust. They're rooted in systemic social injustices that make some populations more vulnerable to poor health than others. And health equity is social justice in health. The population groups that we compare are often racial and ethnic groups, and race is usually associated with biology and physical characteristics like skin color, while ethnicity is usually associated with cultural expression and identification by racial, national, tribal, religious, linguistic, or cultural origin or background. Both are social constructs. that they're used to categorize and characterize seemingly distinct populations. Both are lived realities. For instance, Black is considered a race, while Hispanic and Latino is considered an ethnicity. Race and ethnicity are not mutually exclusive. So for instance, in the US, many Hispanics identify as Black and half of Hispanics identify as white. Today, we need to consider the differences that make a difference and which of these are avoidable, as these are the ones that we need to change. Who am I to talk about this? I am a privileged, white, educated, documented, heterosexual, cisgender, employed, wealthy, healthy, insured, safe, able-bodied, housed, never institutionalized or incarcerated person. I'm also a hybrid. I'm an applied medical anthropologist and a public health planner with academic degrees and multicultural experience from extended residence in the Navajo Nation and in Chiapas, Mexico. My vision is to promote equity through health and health through equity. I am not equipped to address systemic racism in the entire healthcare system, but I can talk about a tiny piece of this, racial and ethnic disparities in diabetes, from my vantage point at Sansum Diabetes Research Institute, where I lead research on type 2 diabetes in Latinos. So what's happening? Diabetes is an epidemic. It's a major public health crisis affecting more than 400 million people worldwide and over 1 in 10 people in the US. Over 90% of diabetes is type 2 diabetes, which will impact 1 in 3 people in our lifetimes. Type 2 diabetes disproportionately impacts those who can least afford it: older adults, those with less formal education, those who are uninsured, and racial and ethnic minorities. These groups have an excess burden of diabetes, got poorer outcomes, higher medical expenses. Among US adults, the prevalence of diagnosed diabetes is highest among American Indian and Alaska Natives, people of Hispanic origin, and non-Hispanic Blacks. Hispanic and Latino people constitute nearly 18% of the US population, 43% of California's population, and 48% of Santa Barbara County's population. So it's very logical to focus here today on the Hispanic and Latino population. In California, Hispanic and Latino people have twice the prevalence of type 2 diabetes as non-Hispanic whites. So that's 1 in 10 Hispanics versus 1 in 20 non-Hispanic whites. In Santa Barbara, of nearly 600 Hispanic and Latino adults at mobile health screenings, we found that half were already living with or at risk of type 2 diabetes, and many were not even aware they had diabetes, which puts them at great risk for serious complications like heart attack, stroke, and kidney failure. Compared to non-Hispanic whites, US adults of Hispanic and Latino origins have higher type 2 diabetes prevalence. They develop it younger, more likely to be undiagnosed, have worse control, have more hospitalization, and have higher rates of eye and kidney disease, amputation, and death from stroke. And they're more likely to die from diabetes. Diabetes is also very expensive. 1 of every 4 healthcare dollars is spent on diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is more expensive for precisely those who can least afford care. So in California, type 2 diabetes is twice as high in adults without a high school diploma than those with a college degree. And in families with incomes below 200% of the federal poverty level compared to those with incomes 300% above it. And there are racial and ethnic disparities in the cost of diabetes as well. Compared to white non-Hispanics, Hispanic Medicare enrollees with diabetes have more acute hospitalizations, longer lengths of stay in the hospital. Things like this result in higher costs. So diabetes is more common, it's more deadly, and more costly for Hispanics than non-Hispanic whites. If we want to know about the people hit the hardest by diabetes, we need to work among the racial and ethnic communities most impacted, and we need to engage members of these communities in the work. Yet communities facing the highest burden of diabetes rarely participate in research, new medical discoveries, and innovation. Hispanics and Latinos are a minority among diabetes researchers, research participants, and care providers. And our quest at SDRI with the Mil Familias programs is to increase participation in research that is by, among, and for Latinos. In 2017, we launched the Mil Familias, or 1,000 Families initiative, in which SDRI trained bilingual community scientists, or especialistas, take lead roles in research. Facilitated by the especialistas, 1,000 Latinos with type 2 diabetes or with a family member with type 2 diabetes will contribute data on over 100 genetic, biological, behavioral, psychosocial, and environmental variables over 10 years. And the results are already informing the development of novel prevention and treatment strategies. And it's two-way learning. We learn from participants, participants learn from us, they get their health results, they get their questions answered, and we connect them to needed services. So what are we finding? Environment matters. Latino adults with type 2 diabetes in our Mil Familias program with high air pollution exposure had significantly riskier blood sugar levels than those with lower air pollution exposure. And they're more likely than non-Latinos to live in areas with that high air pollution exposure. Insurance matters. Uninsured participants had riskier sugar levels than people with health insurance. And again, Latinos are more likely than whites to be uninsured and underinsured. Food security matters. Food insecurity provokes stress, obesity, chronic disease, and poverty. 1 in 6 people with diabetes report food insecurity. And like diabetes, food insecurity is more common in Hispanics than white non-Hispanic people. The more food insecure you are, the more likely you are to have diabetes, and the more likely you are to reduce, delay, or avoid your medication, and to make those daily trade-offs between basic needs like housing or medical bills and buying healthy foods. All of this matters for COVID. Both diabetes and minority race and ethnicity are risk factors for COVID-19. So remember what Dr. King said about injustice in health resulting in death? The top figure here shows that in the US, Indigenous, Black, and Latino people are at least 3 times more likely to have died of COVID than white Americans. In California, it's the same story. The figure on the bottom shows that Latinos make up about 40% of California's population, but nearly 50% of all COVID-related deaths. And this disparity is apparent for all age groups, and it gets more pronounced with age. The pattern repeats itself in Santa Barbara County, where 48% of our population is Hispanic and Latino, but Hispanic Latino individuals account for 65% of cases, 74% of hospitalizations, and 56% of deaths. Tracy Brown, the CEO of the American Diabetes Association, highlighted factors that put people of color at particular risk of suffering from COVID-19, like high rate of underlying conditions, especially diabetes, social determinants of health, economic disparities, racial disparities, systemic barriers, including poverty, limited access to proper healthcare, food, and transportation, which all lead to more unmanaged diabetes, and distrust among African Americans and others of the medical community, which inhibits patients from seeking care or trusting that they can get the care that they need. She reminds us that this isn't new information, but the pandemic shines a light on it. It's a wake-up call for America. She recommends zero copay on insulin and prescriptions, testing in communities that need it most, continuity of insurance coverage, and recognition of unconscious and implicit bias. Recent data show the disproportionate health and economic impacts of COVID-19 on certain groups of color. The discussion has mostly focused on the role of individual behavior. Do we exercise enough? Do we eat the right foods? What has not been talked about much is the role of systemic and institutional racism within medical institutions, the medical bias. Throughout American history, Black people and other minority groups have endured a medical system that has been both exploitative and dismissive. America's medical system has a long history of using Blacks and other racial and ethnic minorities as experimental subjects while also keeping them from receiving adequate medical care. The Tuskegee syphilis experiments come to mind, in which Black men were knowingly allowed to suffer from the disease despite the existence of a treatment. And sadly, there are many other examples of the ways in which our medical system has gained knowledge about health and about the human body from the suffering of certain racial and ethnic groups. And the damaging implicit and explicit biases in our medical system don't suddenly vanish in a pandemic. These biases are playing out right now in COVID prevention, treatment, and care for Blacks and racial ethnic minorities in key ways. The government has often failed to gather the demographic data needed to protect these communities. Black people's and others' health complaints are taken less seriously. These communities are less likely to have the testing and medical supplies and care that they need. Lack of care can be due to physician bias. It can be due to the healthcare payment structures bias and financial disincentives, like clinicians are actually paid less to care for patients who are uninsured, underinsured, or publicly insured. And these patients are disproportionately Black and Latino and Hispanic. So when people don't get the equal and adequate care, they then adhere less to the medical guidance, which results in further skepticism and fear of medical institutions, a reluctance to engage with those institutions in times of need, and frustration that results in people giving up. It also makes people less likely to participate in the trials and the studies and the research, which results not only in their poorer health outcomes, but also in less empirical information on health issues and medication effects in the groups that most need it. A group called White Coats for Black Lives recognizes that racism is one of the major causes of health problems in the US. And this isn't only now. Historically, between 1970 and 2004, the Black-white mortality gap resulted in more than 2.7 million excess Black deaths, making racism a more potent killer than prostate, breast, or colon cancer. And it's a similar story for other racial and ethnic minorities. And the COVID diabetes syndemic has really increased this gap. So addressing racism and its consequences should be a central task of American medicine. Physicians and researchers like myself have to work both within and outside the healthcare system to eliminate inequities in the access to and delivery of care. Some of the ways that health professionals can immediately pursue racial justice are to recruit and support and promote Black and Latino and Native people in medicine to ensure that the workforce reflects the diversity of the US. Hospitals and practices need to eliminate the significant impact of those implicit racial biases in the care of patients. We can advocate for a single payer healthcare system as a means of eliminating cost associated barriers to care. We need to recognize the responsibility to patients, which goes beyond physical exams and prescriptions and surgeries. We have to work to alter the socioeconomic and environmental factors, remember the air pollution and the cost of care, including structural racism that directly affect health. And we have to cede power. We have to partner with, and more importantly, take direction from community members. So to come full circle, many don't realize that Martin Luther King Jr. and Cesar Chavez were contemporaries, and they were born just 2 years apart. Both were passionate advocates for well-being who admired and inspired each other. In 1966, the same year that King spoke about injustice in health, Chavez marched 300 miles to Sacramento to draw national attention to the mistreatment of farm workers. And King sent Chavez a telegram before the march. He said, "The fight for equality must be fought on many fronts, in the urban slums, in the sweatshops of the factories and fields. Our separate struggles are really one, the struggle for freedom, for dignity, and for humanity. We are together with you in spirit and in determination that our dreams for a better tomorrow will be realized. This also has to be fought today in hospital rooms, classrooms, conference rooms, and Zoom rooms. Ultimately, our struggle is one. Eliminating health disparities means freedom, dignity, and humanity." Thanks.
Thank you, Namina. Now we'll just take a couple of questions. Someone asked what needs to be done and who can do it to get the word out about COVID-19 safety measures, things that individuals can and should take in Santa Barbara's communities of color.
I can speak to a great resource that we've developed from Sansom Diabetes Research Institute. It's a website. You can go to Latino Diabetes altogether .sansom.org, and there are a bunch of resources about COVID in English and Spanish. I also approve of and point people to the Santa Barbara County Health Department site, and they also have bilingual information on COVID. And we make an effort to really simplify the language in terms of using lay language, translating very complex technical medical terms into easily understandable language. I would point you there, and from there are other links for help.
That's great. Here's another quick one. You mentioned cisgender in your introduction, and someone wants to know what that means.
Cisgender means that the gender that I was assigned to at birth, and that happened to be female. My parents assigned that to me, and society assigned that to me, matches the gender that I feel that I am, which is female. And so there are many people whose gender assigned at birth doesn't match their recognized gender. And so you find that people who go through life cisgendered, when those match up, have fewer barriers than people whose genders do not match.
Great, thank you. That's educational for me too. I'm not familiar with that term. Well, thank you very much. And I will turn things over to Mary Jacob at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. We are Reve. We're pleased to have Superintendent Hilda Maldonado of Santa Barbara Unified School District join us for this forum. Before I introduce her, I want to share information on the changing ethnic racial composition of students enrolled in 6 of our Santa Barbara area school districts over the past decade by comparing the 2009-10 and 2019-20 school years. On slide 1, we begin by looking at the Santa Barbara Unified District, where total enrollment declined slightly over the decade. In fact, all ethnic racial groups declined in number, but they did so at different rates, with the result that the ethnic racial composition changed over the decade. And this is a pattern we'll see in all 6 districts. For example, the total number of Hispanic students declined from 8,762 to 8,703, but their percentage of the district total grew from 56 to 60%. The number of white students also declined, but their rate of decline was greater than that of Hispanics, with the result that their percentage of total enrollment declined from 36 to 33%. Note the total number of Black and Native American students, which were small to begin with, dropped significantly by more than half. In the Goleta Union District, the pattern is different. Both the total number and the percentage of Hispanic, white, Asian, Black, and Native American students declined. Those declines were made up for by increases in the number of students who identified as being of two or more races and students who did not report any identity at all. In Carpinteria, Hispanics and those reporting two or more races increased. Their percentage share of the district population, while the percentage share for all other groups declined. The Hope District was the only district to experience an increase in the number of Hispanic students. It also had a larger percentage reporting two or more races. All other groups declined in total number and in their percentage. In the Montecito Cold Spring districts, which I've combined on the table, the number of Hispanic students basically remained the same. Declines are greatest among white and Asian students, those reporting two or more races or did not report any race increased. The number of Black and Native American students are very small and were all in the Montecito Union District. The Cold Spring District did not enroll either of those groups. The enrollment for the three high schools in the Santa Barbara Unified District are displayed as a pie chart on this slide. We see that the Hispanic in blue and white and orange groups are the two largest groups enrolled in all three schools. Asian students, represented by gray, are 8% of the Dos Pueblos student body, while at the other two high schools, they are about half that. Given the small number of Black, represented by yellow, and Native American, represented in light blue, it makes sense to look at their actual numbers. Dos Pueblos and Santa Barbara High enrolled 30 Black students each, while San Marcos had 16. As for Native Americans, Santa Barbara High had the most with 12, followed by Dos Pueblos with 9, San Marcos 5. Dos Pueblos had the most students reporting that they were of two or more races, and that is represented in the green color. With this background, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Hilda Maldonado, who is the superintendent of the Santa Barbara Unified School District. Dr. Maldonado joined the district in July of this year. She came to us from the Los Angeles Unified District, where she was Associate Superintendent of Leadership and Partnerships, overseeing the development of system capacity to train and retain high caliber employees, as well as develop partnership and grant efforts. Dr. Maldonado has held many leadership positions in LAUSD. She has also worked as a bilingual teacher, an assistant principal, and a principal at 2 schools, both of which experienced growth in academics, safety, and school culture under her leadership. Welcome, Superintendent Maldonado.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Mary, for this introduction. And I am so impressed by our previous speaker, and I want to almost echo everything that she just said could be applied to our school system. And I took so much away from that presentation. I wanted to start off by just telling you a little bit about why I do what I do. I asked Mary if I could have a few minutes. I am an immigrant child to this country. I came at the age of 11. So when I was listening to the presentation on the health of Latinos, I can relate on so many levels. I came at the age of 11. As I said, I came from Mexico. I was raised by a father who only had a first grade education and a mom with a second grade education. Yet reading in our family was one of the most important things we ever did and talked about around the dinner table. My mom was so proud of getting an education, and it made such a difference in her life and in her ability to raise 6 children in a factory job salary. She was so proud of this, and often told us about her experience as a child growing up in a small town where the community had to come together and raise funds to be able to pay for a teacher's salary. Because my mom lost her mom at the age of 9 years old, her father and her agreed that in order for her to be able to participate in a classroom, she would make breakfast for her teacher every morning. And that is how she came to learn to read. And so I am very informed by my mom's experience and the difference that it made to the 6 of us who are now all high school or college graduates and in managerial positions and contribute to this great country. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about myself and how this informs my leadership. Mary, would you like me to start with some of the questions you posed or share some data?
Yes, we had surveyed our audience to find out their awareness of problems as well as improvements or plans in the district. And one of the things that came up was the experiences of people of color. Either the lack of their experiences in the curriculum or resistance to including it in the curriculum. And those were most frequently mentioned as an issue. That said, the new ethnic studies requirement for high school graduation was mentioned most frequently as a positive step in the right direction. So could you talk about the new requirement, what it is, why it's important, and student response today?
I will. And to begin with, I'm going to start by just sharing my screen. I'm just going to show one quick slide to start that conversation. And this is a slide that shows a little bit of demographics. Let me just make sure that you all can see it properly as we all learn to navigate this new world of Zoom and teach in this way or talk in this way. You can see here the ethnic makeup of our teaching force and our students. So in response to what you shared earlier, Mary, about the changes in the enrollment and the demographics of our students at Santa Barbara Unified, here you can see that it's almost a reversal. Our teachers are 73% white and our students are 34% white. In the Latinx community, we see that 19% of our teachers are Latinx, while 60% of our students are Latinx. In Asian ethnicity, we see a match, 3% teachers, 3% students. Black African-American, we have 1.3% teachers. I don't know how to translate that to you. I imagine that's at least 2 teachers. And then 0.08% students that are Black. 2.5% 2 or more races, 1% in the student population, and a very small indigenous population. And I wanted to just share that to show the challenge that we face in the district, because we know that when students feel like they belong in a school classroom, they see themselves represented by their teachers. And so let me just, sorry, I lost my place here. Talk about then the work of ethnic studies. One of the reasons that I made the move from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara was because I was very drawn to this community's commitment to equity and ethnic studies. And in the curriculum, one of the things that the board, the Board of Education in 2018 did here in Santa Barbara was make ethnic studies a graduation requirement. So as a system, we were one of the few school districts in California who have that as a graduation requirement. And I'm very proud of that work, and I'm proud to support it. And what that ethnic studies requirement means that all of our high school students will be exposed to ethnic studies in a way that really requires them to think about the world that they live in now a little differently than that their parents and people like myself would have experienced back when I was in high school. This graduation requirement can be seen in either taking an ethnic studies elective class or an English class. And it's basically a mix of Black studies, Mexican American studies, Chicano studies, Asian studies, and others. If you were to walk into that classroom today, the things that you would see are young people being engaged in dynamic discussions, applying their learning from previous courses to make sense of current topics like anti-racism, social justice issues, and youth issues being represented. They look at these communities as having the opportunity for there to be debates and discussions where they are looking at their differences and appreciating them while discussing them, but all towards a lens of unity and solidarity. They're looking at how they apply what they learn so that they can make their community better and engage and encourage participation in civic duties or civic life. The key takeaways that we're preparing students to engage and navigate society, reimagining society in a way that they want to see it and feel that they deserve, but also pushing to not replicate some of the things that have existed that cause us to see things like we don't have pathways for our Latino students to participate in advanced placement courses. When I look at the scores in Santa Barbara Unified, I see a lack of access and opportunity for completing A through G requirements to access higher education. I see two tracks. I see a bifurcated education system where we see Latino students relegated to college prep courses, which are considered lower level courses, and don't have access to AP courses, which give students extra points, for example, when they apply to UC or CSU university courses. I also see a large number of Latino students in kindergarten to third grade who are identified as meeting the requirements to be in special education. If you are a Latino boy or girl in K to third grade in Santa Barbara Unified, you are 3 times more likely to end up in a special education program. And that tells me a lot about the beliefs and biases of some of our teachers and our administrators that we look to change in the way that we're looking at our system holistically. So we are looking at our curriculum, we're looking at our practices, and I'll just say that to close this topic off, we have a significant population, I want to say close to 20% emergent multilingual learners in our elementary system that are not prepared to go into junior high school or high school being fluent. And that is because we have completely ignored in California the first language of the student as a language of instruction because of prior laws like Proposition 227 that effectively kept them out of accessing the curriculum in a meaningful way. So I'm looking at ways that we can teach reading in a different way in our K through 5th grade space that both honors and uses the first language as an asset that we have when we are bilingual students and not erasing that language so that we can later on in high school expect them to take a foreign language as part of their high school requirements. So those are some of the ways that we are looking at the issues in Santa Barbara. And again, I'm proud of ethnic studies as a first step towards mitigating those challenges, but also as opportunities for our young people to create a better society than we are handing them today. So we'll go to the next question.
Okay, well, thank you. I think you've kind of anticipated it. Segregation was the next most frequently mentioned topic in the survey. Talking about segregation at the district level of parent, people said, well, some parents move their children to certain schools and schools are getting segregated. But more people talked about segregation in schools that comes with the enrollment of students in the GATE and advanced placement classes. So I don't know if there's more you would like to comment on that topic, or we
Yes.
can move on to the third. Okay.
Let me go into segregation. And Mary, I'm gonna respectfully just say that I'm not quite Dr. Maldonado yet. I expect to be in spring of 2021.
Okay. All right. Well,
So I'm almost Dr. Maldonado, fingers crossed. I think I'm on the right trajectory.
okay.
And I say that because my doctorate is actually in social justice leadership.
Mhm.
And the focus of my study is on the history of Latinos and education of Latinos in the United States. And I'm looking at the practices of Latino leaders in large urban school systems that address having a significant population of Latino English learners. And in doing that work, I learned so much. Again, I'm an immigrant child. You know, I think I had an adequate education in Los Angeles Unified. I'm also a student of Los Angeles Unified. But I think that some of the things I may have missed even in my teacher preparation courses, my administrator preparation courses, was this history of the education of Latino students in the US, which includes Black students as well. And I say that because I learned that there has been hundreds of cases brought forward by Latino parents challenging the school systems throughout the states in the US, whether it's the curriculum that their children are receiving, the language used that their children face, the segregation. So I'll start with a significant case called the Mendez-Westminster case. The Mendez-Westminster case was in Orange County, and it was a case brought forth by 5 Latino families against the Westminster Board of Education, where they challenged the fact that to enroll children in that time, in the 1940s, parents were told, this is the case of one parent where she went to enroll her own children and her brother's children. Her brother's children were darker, her children were lighter. And the secretary said to her, your brother's kids, last name Mendez, can enroll in a Mexican school. Your children who had a French last name could enroll in the white school. And so she asked, why is that? And they said, oh, that's just the way we have set it up. The Mexican children need to be together because they don't understand the language. So that makes them, less intelligent. They're dirty. They don't keep clean. And they need to just be separated. And this is you can look this case up. I've actually read the transcript of the superintendent of Westminster at the time, who did say that Mexican kids bring diseases to school and are less intelligent because they don't speak English. And of course, in the 1940s, if my parents had come, I would have been one of those kids. And so I take this to heart on many levels. So that case was actually one of the key cases that was used later on in the Brown versus Board of Education case, which is a more commonly known case, which put an end to segregation in the United States. There's another case in the 1970s brought forward by a Chinese family in San Francisco called the Lau versus Nichols case. In that case, the Chinese families contended that just to have the same classroom, the same teachers, the same textbooks, did not basically grant their children a equitable education, because these were Chinese children who did not speak English and were failing. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court found that it is true. You cannot just suppose that if it's the same teachers, the same classrooms, the same language, that they're going to succeed at the same level. So that was another case that's very important when it comes to language segregation in our classrooms, that basically allows us to provide additional services to kids like myself who are considered English learners. So I say that because when I look at Santa Barbara And when I look at the demographics of the school-age children in Santa Barbara, I see some of those segregation patterns being repeated. In Santa Barbara, interestingly enough, our elementary schools are where we see most of our lower income or our demographics being reflected, where we have higher rates of Latino students. It is not until junior high school and high school that we start to see the integration of the students that come from Hope and Montecito, Cold Springs, and other schools. That's when the kids come together as junior high and high. So I'm looking closely at what do we do to introduce these kids to each other in a way that's meaningful and respectful and brings in some of that ethnic studies learning. And as I review the way that students are, I said it a little earlier, the programs that they get to participate in, the way that we prepare them for higher ed, I do see that lack of representation of Latino, Black, and Indigenous students in our classes that are considered, more prepared as advanced placement. We do have a bifurcated system in junior high school. We have a college preparation track and we have an advanced placement honor system. We also see it in our fundraising efforts. I think we have a lot of well-meaning. This community is so generous and has been so welcoming. I see there's so many people that have contacted me. How can we help? What can we do? And I see that there are schools that have PTSAs and PTAs that raise a lot of money, and it goes to just help those kids. And those are the schools that have the most. So we want to be able to kind of create ways to close those disparities amongst our school system. And we want to try to really challenge ourselves to create spaces and places where those voices are raised. In the previous presentation, I heard about the study in the health area where we are creating more health specialists that will conduct the research around how to help families with diabetes, for example. We want to do the same thing. We want to create pathways to create teachers. We want to encourage our kids to become teachers so that they can be the teachers that represent our students' demographics in Santa Barbara Unified. We have one program called PEAK that does that with UCSB, and we're very proud of that. This year we have 4 teachers that are former students that went through that program and that are now teaching in our school system. So segregation is alive and well here. We are going to work really hard to change it. And we know that there's a lot of really smart, committed people to do that.
Okay. I want to make a comment on when I was talking about the racial ethnic composition of the students, and we saw declines in, particularly among Native American and African American students. This comes to a point that Mia Lopez has raised, and that is the documentation used to determine the racial makeup of children for the schools supports a continued erasure of Indigenous people. If they are also Hispanic, as well as Native American or African American, it defers them to the Hispanic category. And so this is a problem, it doesn't accurately portray the number of Indigenous and African American students. So I think that's an important point to remember in this conversation, and particularly with the slides that I was showing, which is based on the school reporting that the state has us do.
That's right. Pointing that out, and that's an important point for us to keep in mind too, on how we work with those kids. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think we have time for one more question, and that has to do with the teaching staff. They were identified in our survey. Many people commented that there weren't enough teachers of color, and I think your slide goes to show what those proportions are. And I just wanted to mention that our respondents also thought the anti-bias training that has occurred is a good thing, a step in the right direction, and should continue. I was wondering if you could comment, are there changes afoot with regard to the teaching staff, plans to change it, and are there any programs for continued anti-bias training?
So yes, when it comes to the teaching staff, we have an interesting challenge. And the challenge is that we cannot say that we are only going to hire teachers of color, because that would be reverse racism.
Mhm.
But what we are doing is we are revamping and recruiting hiring practices so that we can attract a more diverse teaching force. I do need to say, though, that having moved here from Los Angeles, that the high cost of living in Santa Barbara is a huge barrier for many of these teachers who would have been a teacher like myself, who became educated. We grew up in poverty. We are educated. We're going to teach, and we need to have a living wage, or a salary that's appropriate to where we're living. We had the same problem in Los Angeles attracting teachers of color, where the high cost of living isn't a real factor. But we are looking at ways to attract more diverse teachers. I mentioned the PEAK program as one of the programs where we want to kind of grow our own. Look at this wonderful opportunity we have. And this is me, I am a Pollyanna at heart. We have 60% students who are Latino in Santa Barbara Unified. I say, even if we took half of them, a quarter of them to push them through to become teachers, we would have teachers here that already live here. Living wouldn't be a problem, and that we could grow into becoming our teachers. So those are some of the couple of ideas that we have to address that. The anti-racism training will continue. We did, you may have heard, we were sued as a district by a small group of people who felt we were being discriminatory against white Christian males. That suit was lost by that group. It was an appeal, but they dropped the appeal recently. So we're very happy to see that, because we really want to get on with this work. But we are going to do another request for proposals and put out a contract to continue that work. Of course, right now, with this pandemic, our focus has been just on being able to focus on how we can open schools safely, and/or how can we still deliver a rigorous education program via a distance learning model. I'm also looking at our bilingual teachers. I'm trying to get a sense of where are they teaching now? And I want to move our bilingual teachers to the lower grades and really impact our K-3 grades, so that we have the teachers who really understand what second language learning looks like, especially because we want to have kids who can read. But if I'm teaching somebody to read in a language they don't understand, that completely dispels the purpose of teaching somebody to read, because you need to have comprehension. You have to comprehend the words, the phrases, the text. But if you're doing it in a language you don't master yet, that's a challenge. So we have to do better in that space. And that's why I'm looking to move some of those teachers there, while also trying to attract more bilingual teachers.
Okay. Just to close out, some of our participants had a question about the slide in which you were saying we tend to center what we know.
Yes.
Could you explain that? I think they didn't quite understand.
I am going to try, and of course, my executive director of diversity just walked out, but this is something that's a Santa Barbara Unified phrase that is used a lot here, where we want teachers to understand, if you center what you know and you are white and you're teaching Latino students, but you know you're going to come from your perspective or your lens, then we want you to think about how you open up your lens, how you learn more about the lens of the students that you're teaching, so that you center them in your teaching delivery, in your strategies, in your text, in your classroom. Does it represent who they are? I hope that was helpful.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for joining us. I know we had asked you about action items, but maybe we could get those from you later on and share those at our website. We had asked you to share some action items that people could take, our audience, to help support students of color.
I will send those to you, Mary, and I will say to the audience that's here with me here today is, one action I would like for everyone to help me with is to communicate this idea that we have a significant disproportionality problem, where we need to say it and name it, that we are failing as a system so many students of color, and that needs to change. And I just think we need to talk about it. And I'm open to having people help us communicate that problem so they could understand why we do what we do in Santa Barbara.
Okay, thank you so much, Superintendent
Thank you.
Maldonado, for joining us today. And
It has
now,
been my, thank you.
great, it's been wonderful. And now I'll turn it back to Linda.
Hello. So I realized to my horror that I cut one of the videos in half that I was supposed to show earlier. It's the bit about white privilege and so on. And I think what we'll do is we'll show that at the end, because we probably will be going over 1:30. And I think it's more important to cover the action items than to hear a white privilege story if we have to make a choice. So let's now go to the second part of looking at Santa Barbara's past. And now to the second part of our glimpse of Santa Barbara's past. At the May 31 rally at the courthouse, Crystal Farmer Siegert spoke passionately about the importance of the Second Baptist Church for 5 generations of her family, and then told us that the eventual bankruptcy and loss of property in 2017 did not need to happen. In September 2010, dignitaries like Lois Capps and Salud Carbajal joined the congregation and Pastor Wallace K. Shepherd Jr. to celebrate 100 years of the church. It was founded by Reverend Thomas in 1910 as the Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church. After the 1925 earthquake, it was rebuilt and given its final name, Second Baptist Church. There were several locations before landing on its final site, 1032 East Mason Street. A few years after the centennial event, the church decided to add much needed senior housing to the property. In 2014, there were newspaper articles about 8 units that would allow for Section 8 vouchers and a ribbon cutting ceremony. The church served as an important gathering place, shown here hosting a community discussion about police profiling of Black and brown residents. Articles in local newspapers tell the sad story of what happened after the building work began. The first contractor bought materials with the church's money that was ultimately used for another project, and he produced fake invoices. The loan company paid for work never completed. As of 2015, the church was short $156,000 of the $2.3 million needed to complete the project. They tried to work with a lender, a local bank, and sought community donations, but could not raise enough to keep the property from being sold for apparently below market value. Bankruptcy occurred in 2017 and is a cautionary tale of what can happen if community centers and cultural assets are not protected by the broader community. Looking at our survey results, only 7% of respondents knew about the loss of Second Baptist Church before this year. 59% were aware of the negative implications of the Indio Muertos Street, which means dead Indian, and 90% were aware of the Sambos brand being hurtful to people of color. The last 2 symbols were finally removed from our area this year after years of attempts. One of the healing justice demands is number 4. We demand protection and preservation of Black landmarks rather than monuments to white supremacy. St. Paul AME, Friendship Baptist Church, and Franklin Neighborhood Center have been symbols for Black unity and peace. Prioritize the restoration of these spaces and name their Black creators. Efforts are being made to address those concerns. The St. Paul AME Church at 502 Olive Street officially became a City of Santa Barbara landmark this August. It was founded in 1903 and is significant to the architectural heritage of Santa Barbara because it is among few existing buildings constructed in the city in the Carpenter's Gothic style. Nicole Hernandez, the city's architectural historian, said the church has also left a moral imprint on the Lower East Side neighborhood. Quote, members of the congregation fought restrictive housing covenants and racial discrimination in many forms, including at public beaches, swimming pools, and restaurants. Members of the church were active in the NAACP and helped raise legal defense funds to print briefs used in the arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court in the Brown versus Brown of Education case that desegregated public schools. End of quote. Systemic racism in public safety. Sadly, 59% of our survey respondents do not know the story of Megan Hockaday. I am reading excerpts from an article by Tonica Reed printed in EdHat on August 12, 2020. Megan Hockaday, a Santa Barbara native, was shot and killed by Oxnard police officer Roger Garcia on March 28, 2015 in her Oxnard home. Garcia was responding to a report of a verbal domestic dispute called in by Hockaday's partner. Within 20 seconds of entering the apartment, Garcia shot Hockaday multiple times in the presence of her partner and their 3 young daughters. Hockaday and her sister, Amisha Charlton, both grew up in Santa Barbara. Megan attended Peabody Charter School, and both sisters attended Santa Barbara Junior High and Santa Barbara High, where Charlton was the varsity squad captain and Hockaday the JV squad captain, making it the first time in Santa Barbara High's history to have 2 Black cheerleading captains. At the time of her death, Hockaday was a young mother who was in desperate need of help. In addition to having a tumultuous relationship with her partner, she was dealing with postpartum depression and raising 3 children, all under the age of 5. The police report did not describe Officer Garcia employing any type of de-escalation methods. It details him entering with his gun already drawn, and when Hockaday exited her kitchen with a knife, he immediately and fatally shot her 3 times. Hockaday's family believes the incident was an act of excessive police force. When asked what suggestions she would give people in need of help who are not comfortable speaking with or calling on police in time of need, Charlton explained that it depends on the situation. Quote, people want to call the police just because they have a grievance. Though she noted, if you are Black, that is not the number you call. Charlton continued, I did not realize that the perception of Black people was still so bad, that the systemic racism was still so bad. I did not know that until she died. Everything that I know now, that I figured out or been taught or have learned has been because this happened to us. Even fewer people surveyed, 16.5%, knew the story of Brian Carreño. Like Megan, he was 26 years old when he died and grew up in Santa Barbara. There are many other similarities between the two. They had significant mental health challenges. Brian exhibiting suicidal tendencies. They both had a knife and were killed with multiple shots. They were killed on the same date that concerned family members reached out to police for help. Their deaths are both considered a result of excessive police force, and the families are pursuing legal action. From his obituary, Brian Devin Carreño was born May 28, 1990 in Santa Barbara and passed away on February 12, 2017. He loved hiking, camping, and any outdoor activities. He also enjoyed family gatherings, writing poems, and playing his guitar. He is survived by his daughter. Carreño's family has filed a wrongful death and civil rights lawsuit against the sheriff's office, in part because the deputies knew about Carreño's mental health problems and should have had a better plan. The lawsuit is in mediation with a date of May 22nd, 2021, that may be delayed due to the pandemic. The other similarity between Megan and Brian is that they deserve to have a chance to get better. And if they had been white, more of our survey respondents and community at large would have been aware of their stories. It is also chilling to see the county sheriff page discussion of what happened in Brian Carreño's case. There are lots of comments about a job well done. The first commenter says, "Good job, officers. I am thankful they were all able to return home safely to their families after having to go through that." To those saying the officers are wrong, be thankful they are here to serve and protect us from crazy people breaking into homes and running around brandishing a large knife. Regardless of what else is found about police practices that need to be improved for the Santa Barbara County and city, it is hard to argue that we don't need more mental health professionals involved in emergency calls. Of course, the whole country is looking into the problems of excessive police force and better protections for people of color. There will be models that can be looked at, such as this one being evaluated in San Francisco. For anyone wanting to suggest what the county should be considering in regard to changes in police budgets or bringing in more social service personnel to handle situations that need additional mental health support, the county invites you to show up on the afternoon of December 1st and offer your public comments on that issue. Let's look at the remainder of the Healing Justice Santa Barbara demands, which were originally labeled as Black Lives Matter demands around the time of the May 31st rally. 1, we demand the Santa Barbara City Council adopt a resolution condemning police brutality and declare racism a public health emergency. 2, we demand transparency and accountability from the Santa Barbara City Police Department. No more community conversation without changes to policy and practices. No more internal investigations of misconduct. Create a civilian review board with members selected by the community. Prioritize mental health services and rehabilitation. Number 3, we demand transparency and accountability from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff. Update use of force policy to center de-escalation. No isolation quarantine for inmates attending court or contacting their lawyers. Reduce jail admissions by redirecting people to community-based mental health and substance abuse treatment services. We demand, this is what we reviewed before. Number 4 is the demand to protect and preserve Black landmarks. 5, we demand institutional support from an annual Juneteenth celebration. A city and county commitment to allocate funds for this annual celebration of Black emancipation and liberation. For number 5, the city has allocated $35,000 to be paid for the Juneteenth celebration, and I believe the proposal was to have that be administered by Santa Barbara Foundation. That happened yesterday at the city council meeting. The county has allocated $500,000 for an equity fund that could be used for a variety of purposes. And that is another reason to show up on December 1st to voice your ideas on best use of funds. Whenever possible, our comments should reflect what is being recommended by people of color. Here is the web page that the city has set up to address the racial justice and equity initiatives. So you can go through those on your own to look at all the details. The important thing to know about is the deadline that's coming up to find the commission that's going to oversee the police oversight committee. They're going to help form it. That's the Community Formation Commission. So that's another page, as you see here. And you have to be a City of Santa Barbara resident. Now, this is to be on the commission to form the police oversight, not to be on the police oversight committee. And I imagine in both cases, you will need to be a resident of the city of Santa Barbara, but you are not required to be a citizen. And for the first Community Formation Commission, they are paying $50 per meeting. Okay. So I think we are now going to talk about action items, but first we can say that if you need to leave the meeting because we are a little bit over what we were hoping, this is being recorded, so you can always come back and look later. And I believe that Mary is going to share her screen with some action item ideas.
Okay, we've put together a group of things that you as individuals, if you'd like to get involved in the community or get more educated, we share these with you and we'll post them at our website. Showing up for racial, of course, there are many people to begin with who are donating their time to help educate all of us. So if you can support them, Coffee with a Black Guy, Healing Justice Santa Barbara, Heart to Heart Sharing Stories, Restorative Justice Network, Pastor David Moore, and Alternatives to Violence Project.
It's Restorative Community Network.
Linda, why don't you go ahead and interrupt me as appropriate? Showing up for racial justice, Santa Barbara has many good resources and actual events that are coming up. We've mentioned the December 1st meeting of the County Board of Supervisors, the deadline to apply for the Santa Barbara City Community Formation Committee, December 5th, the conversation we're hosting
December
with
4th.
Oh, December 4th is the Mia Lopez?
No, I'm sorry. December 4th is the deadline to be part of the Community Formation Commission, which is really important. We need to encourage people to apply.
Yes. And then December 5th is a Saturday. That's a conversation with Mia Lopez as a follow-up to this forum. And then on December 7th is the next monthly meeting of Showing Up for Racial Justice. And they're having an introductory webinar, which would be a wonderful opportunity. And then on December 8th, we have the forum follow-up discussion for this presentation today on confronting racism here in Santa Barbara from 5:30 to 7. December 10th is the meeting of the League of Women Voters Social Policy Committee. And you're welcome to register for that. For those interested in mental health service improvements in the county, we've got the National Alliance on Mental Illness website listed, the Santa Barbara Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, we share their website. And for those who have an interest in immigrant assistance, the Interfaith Sanctuary Alliance is doing work here in Santa Barbara. If you have an interest in preserving the murals currently threatened to be removed from Ortega Park, we have the contact information for Mark Moses Alvarado, who's the founder of the Community One Bridge Project. If you want to support groups and would like to donate, we have the Central Coast Alliance for United for Sustainable Economy here in Santa Barbara, CAUSE, 805 UndocuFund that provides disaster relief for immigrant families, the Santa Barbara Foundation, Healing Justice Santa Barbara, Fund for Santa Barbara, who does social justice grant making, and for educational resources, the Santa Barbara Library's anti-racist reading list is a really good place to start. And there is a course offered at City College, Building an Equity Mindset.
So lots to do in December before everybody, well, we used to disappear for holidays, but I guess that's not happening this year. So maybe we can be more productive. So do any of the panelists want to make any other statements before we play that one missing video from earlier? Okay, I think I will make my way. Just give me a second. Got to make sure we don't rewatch the same thing you've already seen. My view of white privilege has evolved over the last few years. In my biracial family, we have white-skinned relatives who had a lot of trouble during the recession. We have dark-skinned relatives that have done very well. But in the end, a mom might be mistaken for a nanny or be very concerned about what's going to happen to her children. There are lots of examples of Black males, prominent Black males, who have been stopped by police and threatened. And any white person is likely to have a history, ancestors that were able to get loans and buy property, and that gave them a foundation for generations to build on. Here's one way to illustrate white privilege. On TikTok, Kenya Bundy, better known as Boss Big Mama, created an activity called Check Your Privilege. To get the full effect, you can participate along with the stars from Dancing with the Stars by holding up your two hands and follow instructions.
Check Your Privilege edition. Put a finger down if you have been called a racial slur. Put a finger down if you've been followed in a store unnecessarily. Put a finger down if someone has crossed the street to avoid passing you. Put a finger down if you've had someone clench their purse in an elevator with you. Put a finger down if you've had someone step off of an elevator to keep from riding with you. Put a finger down if you've been accused of not being able to afford something expensive. Put a finger down if you have had fear in your heart when being stopped by the police. Put a finger down if you have never been given a pass on a citation that you deserved. Put a finger down if you have been stopped or detained by police for no valid reason. Put a finger down if you have been bullied solely because of your race. Put a finger down if you have been denied service solely because of the color of your skin. Put a finger down if you've ever had to teach your child how not to get killed by the police. Any fingers left? That's privilege.
My journey as a white privileged lady began in the cradle of white supremacy, a Park City suburb of Dallas. In my school, there was one Jew, one girl that had a Hispanic sounding name, and thinking back, she probably didn't have to work on a tan as hard as the rest of us, but no Black students. I call this my beige period because my skin was beige, my house was beige, the whole community was kind of boring. What's disappointing is that that school, which is public, is still almost all white. And this is why my cousins in Texas are petrified about the Black Lives Matter rioters. Luckily now there is one African-American resident who was able to tell the media that the people outside of his house were not raging rioters. He described them as cheerleaders at the local high school or Black churchgoers. After Dallas, I lived in Lawrence, Kansas, Raleigh, North Carolina, Miami, Florida. Miami was very diverse in terms of great festivals, good ethnic food, but both Miami and Raleigh were very segregated. When I landed in Santa Barbara in 1990, I'd never had a Black or brown neighbor or friend, but I did like the festivals. Until 4 years ago, I was one of those people that didn't think we had a racism problem locally. Looking at our survey respondents, 16% were like me, saying they were ignorant about Santa Barbara racism 10 years ago, but do agree it's a problem now. 71% have always believed we have a significant problem here. I became active in various community groups after I retired, which was a good way to get to know folks from other racial ethnic groups and to learn important lessons I had missed. I learned about the Tulsa Wall Street Massacre, which only 45% survey respondents knew about before 2020, and the horrific Tuskegee syphilis experiments on Black people that lasted until 1972. That had 80% awareness from our respondents. The most transformative group I attended was 8 weeks of heart to heart, sharing stories of race and racism led by Sojourner Kincaid Roll and Sherry Gurse. The Surge community showing up for racial justice was also very helpful for my education. My journey from beige took a while, but I've now landed where I wanted to be with lots of colorful friends and neighbors. Now the problem is finding how to protect and increase our diversity as a community. We have been losing our Latinx Hispanic population over the last 9 years, in part because of our high housing costs. The housing crisis affects everyone, especially our younger workforce. And I know there are African Americans who didn't stay because they were not finding enough of a Black community. There seems to be a lot of momentum for changing that. As we look at the tough year behind us and hopeful creative plans for vitalizing downtown, of finding more affordable housing, helping our renters, and recovering economic vitality for local businesses, it is clear that we need to acknowledge the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which will have many benefits. Okay, well, it's kind of an embarrassing way to end the show. Maybe other people have a few things to comment, but that is all I have to share. Thank you. Maybe I should just officially thank everyone for coming, and then we will end the meeting. Thanks much. And it is recorded.